And we just heard the Treasury Secretary. I don't know whether he's trying to walk down some of the antagonizing things that Trump is saying. Is there a way out of Greenland?
If Bessent were president, I think that he'd be building a lot of confidence with the Europeans with that statement. But when he says it's a false narrative, does that mean when President Trump announces that there are tariffs that are going to hit these European countries on February 1st, which is like a week from now, that was a false narrative? I mean, look, I do know that Marco Rubio has been working assiduously to try to find a way to square the circle on Greenland. Is there a 100-year lease, for example, for Denmark? Is there a way that the Americans would have veto authority over some of what Greenland defense measures, security measures would be, but they wouldn't actually get ownership, which is the Danish red line and the European red line? But the point is that Trump has accepted none of those things. Right. And ultimately, the American people did not vote for Bessent. They didn't vote for Rubio.
Chad, I don't understand what the red line is for Europeans, because they're talking tough, but there's nothing to back it up. So what could they actually do? Well,
that is the real question here. Will the Europeans back up some of the tough language that they have been using with real action? Of course, they could do something when it comes to counter tariffs. They have that option. They could go even further with some of the tougher measures that they could implement at the European level. But so far, they haven't done anything other than talk. And in some cases, you had Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, yesterday saying, wait a minute, let's be careful here. Germany, of course, very dependent on exports to the U.S.
They're not talking as one. Why not?
Well, they aren't one. Europe is not a state. The United States is. China is. When Donald Trump tried to get the Chinese to back down on tariffs, of course, the Chinese backed Trump right into a corner, and Trump had to negotiate. But he thinks that he can push the Europeans around, and so far he's right. Now, there has been talk of this anti-coercion instrument that many Europeans say that they will implement. Macron, in particular, the Italians have said, not yet, we want to talk. Starmer has said, not yet, we want to talk. Ursula von der Leyen is going to be addressing the forum shortly, and she has, in my view, neither the temperament, personally, nor the institutional capacity to hit the Americans back.
But to Ian's point, we had a story just yesterday where we were speaking to many sources within the European Commission, within the European Union, saying they want von der Leyen to be more forceful, and that Europe needs to come up with a response, and so far they're not seeing that.
Yeah, but so my thinking is, why, is it because they're afraid that this escalates and then we go to actually a war?
No.
Or do they try and see whether if they play the long game, Trump will just forget and get onto something else?
It's mostly because they aren't dealing from the same set of interests. I mean, the Nordic countries believe this is urgent and that this could break NATO, and I think there are some Europeans that support them on that. The Baltics do, the Poles do. I think that France does. But ultimately, the Italians don't. And a lot of other Europeans do.
But why?
Not.
Because they think they can speak to Trump? Because actually the Prime Minister Meloni has a good relationship with
Also,
him.
because in part it doesn't matter that much to them individually. I think that is a big part of the issue here. National security does not mean the same thing when you talk to all of these different European leaders.
Well, and I think when you say, who has a line into Trump, Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, thought he had a line into Trump and was speaking to him regularly. They're one of the ones who got slapped with these tariffs now because they have been backing Denmark. So who really has a line into him?
What's going to happen here is that the Europeans are ultimately going to see that they're divided. That this should be the one issue. It should be the crisis they want, because Americans do not support Trump on Greenland by a large majority. Right. Americans do ultimately have a sense of fairness, and they understand that the Americans are treating the Danes as a bully, that they are, and this is purely for Trump's ego. It's not a national security matter that could be resolved by the Danes very easily. He has refused to negotiate with the Danes on that issue. Trump says we've been working for 20 years. This wasn't an issue for Trump. When he was president for 4 years, he had the opportunity to move it. So the question is, what do you do when the interests of the United States president actually diverge from the interests of the United States? Well, and that is a real issue on Greenland.
Ian, do Republican lawmakers, for the most part, are not happy about this? Do they step in? I mean, there's still a Congress.
There is a congressional delegation that is here. It is a bipartisan congressional delegation. There were several Republicans I spoke with yesterday morning. They clearly are not happy. They were in Denmark, showing their support for one of America's most steadfast allies, fighting side by side and dying just the same number per capita in Afghanistan as the Americans did. But for President Trump, that does not matter. It does not matter. And if you are European, you feel like the United States is treating you with utter contempt.
Right.
They're treating you worse than they're treating the Chinese, worse than they're treating the Russians. Why would they do that? And the answer is because they can. So unless the Europeans decide that they're going to show that there will be consequences for President Trump directly for treating them with contempt, he will continue to.
Consequences are messy, but we're talking about possibly selling U.S. treasuries from pension funds. I mean, is that feasible? Is there any appetite for that?
There is some conversations we hear going on among some of the pension funds, like do they divest from U.S. assets over this, in particular in Denmark, but whether they really do that or not, that certainly remains to be seen. We had Besson saying this morning that he believes that's a false narrative. I've also been thinking about the fallout in the Nordic countries. They have been so pro-American, not just from a political point of view, but culturally as well. That's absolutely changing now. You look at the protests that have been taking place across Denmark last weekend. That's unheard of.
Permanent damage is being done to the United States and its relationships with its friends around the world. Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, has just come to Davos, returning from a trip to Beijing, where he has developed a strategic partnership that will bring Chinese automobiles into Canada. Why? Because they no longer feel they can trust their supply chain with American automotive manufacturer. Why are they going to be working with Chinese tech firms to a greater degree? Because they had done America's bidding on Huawei. It got them in trouble, and now they feel like they can't trust the Americans. This is America's closest ally. You think the Europeans aren't going to respond?
You see something happening similar in Germany with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. He had initially wanted to take a very tough stand with China. He's now planning to go to China. They just announced new incentives for automobiles. They're going to allow Chinese cars in as part of that. So it's happening in many countries.
But it was interesting for Canada that actually President Trump wasn't against that too much. I think he gave it almost like a blessing
He said, I
in
understand
disguise.
why they're doing it.
Right?
That's right.
But do they buy defense from China? I mean, there's
no, not
buying,
defense,
but there's buying a little bit. But you actually need the real stuff.
But the Canadians are going to be stepping up their defense purchasing, and over time, they're going to do a lot more to actually integrate with the Europeans as opposed to the United States. Right. The long-term implication of the U.S. will continue to be the most important trading partner for Canada. The U.S. will, on the other hand, be doing less with Canada than it used to. And when they build that infrastructure out, that is permanent. That's change.
Will the U.S. get Greenland?
Get Greenland? I think the answer is no, but I think the question is how much damage is going to be done to the relationship before that becomes evident. And right now, we're in an escalation mode. Is Trump going to use Davos to back down, or does he need to actually see that this plays out more badly for him over time?
I mean, he did last year at the NATO summit. Actually, it went off much better than many people had expected. So could he show up in Davos, to Ian's point, and actually negotiate with people? Possibly. It depends on which Trump shows up.
But now he's also he's going after the UK for something, with one of the islands.
For giving up the Chagos Islands. He already said he supported it. That's right.
Right.
So, he changes
what's
his mind.
Mindset?
Well, ask Marjorie Taylor Greene. I hate to bring her up, but the fact is that, he had one position on the Epstein files and she supported it. Then he changed his mind. And MAGA is whatever Trump says MAGA is at the moment, right? It is not an ideological consistency. It is you must be loyal to Trump. And if Trump changes his mind, as he does, you support what he has changed his mind to.
Where are the Republicans in this?
I would say that the Republicans continue to publicly support Trump on virtually every issue. And that is likely to continue to be true until the Democrats take the House in the midterms, or until there is a major crisis. And either of those things can happen, in the future.
And the Democrats?
The Democrats still are leaderless, and they still are very unpopular. But there's no question that at this point they see that the midterm elections are going to be mostly about the incumbent. And in that regard, they feel better about taking some momentum.
I want to ask you about Japan in a second, but do we know who President Trump is meeting whilst he's here?
We don't know for sure. He said, of course, this morning that he wants to have a number of meetings with people over Greenland. We believe he'll meet with Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. Of course, we haven't been talking about Ukraine, and actually, Stubb, the Finnish president, was saying this is what we should be talking about while we're here, not Greenland, but what's going to happen with Ukraine. But that has really been pushed off the agenda for many people.
Good news for Putin.
I mean, this is good news for Putin.
Of course it is. Yeah.
But he's also invited him on the Gaza Peace Board. So again, unclear what that relationship looks like.
Also unclear the Gaza Peace Board is the Gaza Peace Board. I mean, if you read the charter, it sounds like it's something that Trump is intending to be, sort of his group of leaders that are going to talk about international issues more broadly, but apparently not with Macron.
Could I just a question, what does Trump want? Does he want to win? Does he want to see that or show the world that he's won on everything?
Well, he has said that the Donroe Doctrine is all about, sort of the backyard will be a top priority. Venezuela was a big win that clearly empowered him. Yeah. But at home, what he wants is very clear. He wants an end of checks and balances on the executive. And that means both complete loyalty within his administration. It means complete loyalty within the administrative state. And it also means doing everything possible to make the judiciary less independent and more aligned with him.
Your take on Japan, I mean, there's big market moves. I'm not going to ask you to talk about the markets, but when you look at the prime minister, she was doing very well in the polls. She called an election. Could this backfire?
Well, it could backfire, but she called an election because her party, the Liberal Democratic Party, is underwater in the polls, and her approval ratings are around 70%.
Right.
And I don't think that a sudden spike in bond yields is going to suddenly take away the fact that she is really considered much more independent. She's outside of all these political clans in the LDP, all of whom had come from leaders and leaders and leaders in their families. She's a complete outsider. She's the first female prime minister. She's talking tough on Taiwan. She wants to focus on growth. And she just started. So ultimately, calling for near-term elections was the right move for her, even though there's a possibility that's a risky move.
So this market volatility, voters will look through it.
Japanese voters? I think Japanese voters are supporting her at this point, yes.
Okay, thank you both for joining us. Ian Bremmer, president of the Eurasia Group, and Chad Thomas, Bloomberg's executive editor for Europe.